Welcome. On behalf of RIC, Institute for Gender Equality and Difference, and the Gender Equality Studies and Training Program, or the GEST program at the University of Iceland, I want to welcome you all to the fifth talk of the 2021 Spring Term Conversation Series. Today's session is on the spaces opened up by the Me Too movement in academia and workplaces. My name is Elín Björk Jóhannsdóttir and I'm a project manager at RIC. Today's speakers are Vinita Chandra and Lisa Salmansson. Vinita Chandra is an associate professor in the Department of English at Ragmas College at Delhi University, India. She is a founding member of the Gender Forum, chairperson of the Sexual Harassment Complaints Committee, and the presiding officer of the Internal Complaints Committee for Sexual Harassment at the college. Lisa Salmansson is senior lecturer at Örebro University, Sweden. Her research interests include the sociology of work and the sociology of migration, the Swedish Me Too movement, labor market integration, segregation, skilled immigration, and unaccompanied youth. So this series of events follows up on two recent books on Me Too. Firstly, the fifth issue of RIC's book series, Fléttur, and I have the book here. It is in Icelandic. And it is edited by me, Þorgerður Þorvaldsdóttir and Kristín Pálsdóttir. And secondly, the Routledge Handbook of the Politics of the Me Too movement, edited by Irma Erlingsdóttir, director of RIC and GEST, and Giti Chandra, research specialist at GEST. And Giti will moderate the session here today. And both of our speakers have chapters in the handbook. We will start with short inputs from our speakers to set the tone for the conversation and discussion, and participants can send in their questions in the chat. So I'll hand over the floor to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Elin and Giti, for inviting me to this session. I'm on parental leave, so for me this has been a very great moment to just think about this once again. I actually have some slides that I would like to share with you because of the topic, more or less, that it's, I hope you are able to see that now. And then I'm gonna put here. So in my chapter in the politics of the Me Too movement, I've tried to describe one of the many hashtags in Sweden that came from different workplaces. And I was the one starting a hashtag called Akademiuppropet that was gathering voices from women in academia about sexual harassment. And this hashtag then more or less became a sort of uprising by women in academia against sexual harassment. And I'm a PhD in sociology, as you said, in Örebro University. And I just wanted to say, what is Akademiuppropet? So in Sweden, different professional groups got together, people in professional groups got together and made their own hashtags. So that kind of referred to their workplace in some ways. Most of them were kind of nitty-witty and kind of med vilken rätt was one, you know, like in academia, we couldn't really make up our minds about one. So we just call it Akademiuppropet. It started as a private group on Facebook. At its top, it had 9,000 members, more or less during 3 weeks in 2017. And through this process, we gathered about 100 testimonies by email and in the group. We also, I identified some of these testimonies, or actually only those that came to the email address, because we wanted this to be very safe. So the ones that were sent to our email address, they were unidentified, and then we we made some demands that we, as a group, could sign off on, and we handed this over to the Ministry of Education. And these were then also signed by 2,648 people. Not as many as the members in the group, but this was because it was very much in a rush in the end. This was also then published in one of the major newspapers in Sweden, Svenska Dagbladet, and this follows kind of how many of these hashtags or these uprisings did. Many of these worked more or less like this. Some of these have been shut down, these Facebook groups. Akademiuppropet, we decided to shut the group down after, because of, not making, we didn't want to, wanted it to be a safe place. Some others have stayed open and continued the discussion, or reopened after some years, and like people could add again. This is one of the things that is kind of special. What happened was that this is just a picture of how much all the rectors, all the big universities in Sweden went out and said, we have zero tolerance towards this. We're going to work for it. We're going to have whistleblowers functions, and it got a very big, very much attention. And of course, it's still, this work is still going on. And some things that I would like to, that I wanted to bring to the table here is the Swedish case is always like, why is it interesting? I think it's interesting because the digital, it's a highly digital and unionized country. So we're kind of used to being unionized and organized. And the digital divide is not as big, even though, of course, this is a problem. And equality is high up on the agenda. Why academia, I think, is interesting is in these testimonies, abuse of power is one theme that goes goes through all of them. So it's often men in higher positions that are perpetrators. It's not colleagues, not as much, or in the same position. And we also, I think it's also interesting because there's a lot of semi-professional spaces, so conferences, seminars, meetings, because you want to meet outside of the academy. It's all these kind of the private and private workplace distinction is not there as much. Many short-time contracts, many men in higher position, and many women in lower. So there's maybe that kind of, that also makes it interesting. And the social media, I also kind of highlight in my chapter, it was a very important tool for social mobilization in the way that we did it with a private group that decided on different things and how to work and what to make public, also made it even more safe, I think. But it was safe until it grew too big. I also wrote a piece a little bit on this. I see it as some kind of digital counter public. So it's a place where we withdraw from the public and kind of organize, and then we had like the power to go public and as a bigger voice, or like a collective voice. But it's not as private as it seems. So I think that's one thing. I mean, like we use platforms that we also do not really know how our data is used. That's why we decided to close it down. Still, we don't know if it's really closed or how much is saved. So that I think must be talked about more. And as social media platforms were not designed to mobilize people, it's designed for other things. So I think that's something that I want to think more about, like that the platforms we used are designed for other things, and should we, is this something for future social movements? Thank you. That was my short little introduction.
Thank you, Elisa. Short, but very, very packed with ideas and things that I know that people will want to talk about later. So I'm going to ask Vinita to come and say her piece. The floor is yours.
So hello, thank you so much for having me here. And after we did our chapters in the Routledge Me Too book, there was just so much that went into it. And it's just so nice to be able to have this conversation. And because as all of us who work in this area, as Lisa was saying, we know that this is never-ending work. It has to constantly keep happening, and it remolds itself in different ways, and we are looking at different aspects of it. And so I'm really glad that we're able to have this conversation, and to be able to talk about our ideas. I actually looked at my chapter, and the pandemic and the lockdown work from home in India has been much harsher than in Iceland or in Sweden. So I looked at my chapter and it just seemed far away at the moment, because everything we've been doing is on online. It's on digital media. It's through Zoom or Google Meet or whatever it is. And it's been interesting for me to see how the work that we do has changed. And it has also changed in many surprising ways. And I'll just talk a little bit about that. But as I was thinking about the Me Too movement, and this is something that we've been talking about a lot, I realized that it has actually opened up this space that in a sense prepared us for this moment in the pandemic, when things became so different from what we had ever expected in our lives to be facing. And to start out with, because I'm on a sexual harassment committee, we had 2 or 3 cases, and one of them was a case of rape. And I couldn't even imagine talking to somebody online with a team or committee online. And so in a sense, much of that work just stopped entirely. But what I did find is that, the academia especially, I think, had made a space for being able to speak online, talk digitally about sexual harassment. And this is because, so much has been talked about how this Me Too movement is a very exclusionary movement, because it depends on a certain level of literacy. It depends on having access to a keyboard. And in a country like India, of course, none of these things can be taken for granted. But in academia, and especially in the university, in higher education, both these things are available. And so although the major Me Too movement, after Alyssa Milano tweeted in 2017, the movement actually came to India in 2018, started here at that time. And there were a lot of big names, big men who were named and shamed, and for some there was penal action, for some there was nothing, as we know across the world. Newspaper and television talked about this. But much more than that, what happened was, especially in academia, and in academic departments, in debating societies, for instance, where aggression is the norm, in dramatic society, where the physical form, touching, feeling, experiencing the body, in sports, all of these had different Me Too movements, which actually didn't get talked about very much at a national level or at any level at all, but were certainly there. And what I wanted to do in the few minutes that I have is to look at 2 aspects of the Me Too movement in the last year and a half, when everything academics has gone online. One is the space that was created by the Me Too movement to record and to report sexual harassment and abuse. And the second is the awareness that this movement created among young people to do the very crucial work of gender sensitization. So these were the 2 things that I'm just going to, for a few minutes each, touch on. So in India, students and teachers have not met physically for a year and 15 months, since March of 2020. So all our work has gone online, and socializing is happening online. Any kind of interaction is happening online. And so the report of sexual harassment or of abuse or even recording of these has also moved online. And it did, I think for the first few months, nothing happened at all. But when the transition did happen, it was very smooth. So I was used to being stopped in the corridors by students or even by faculty saying, I need to talk to you about something. I always know the look in the eye, so I know what's going to happen, what kind of experience is going to be talked about. So when this transition happened so smoothly online, I was actually not surprised at all. I'm surprised it took that much time for us to get used to it. But it did happen because the digital space had already been created, you know, as Lisa also said, as a safe space. It was a space that had been used, that had been created for being able to talk about sexual harassment. It had created a community. That is that it had created a community of people who had all said, me too. That is that it happens to everyone. And it had created this awareness that gender-based violence and harassment is a universal thing. It's not something that happens only to, you know, to individuals. So this idea of reporting online or talking about it even online, even just on chat boxes, things, you know, I'm much older, so it sort of is not that easy for me to move entirely away from looking at people and doing this. But with people talking in chat boxes, reporting experiences and so on, a lot of this happened very smoothly. And I do credit the Me Too movement as opening up this space. But along with that, there's something, you know, and I'm not keeping an eye on the time, so someone has to stop me when my time is up, or just warn me.
Don't worry, just finish what you have to say. That it's okay. Not cast in stone.
All right. But one of the very interesting developments that has happened, I think, along with this, is that this pandemic has removed the physical gendered body out of the classroom and the workspace. And it has therefore meant that the anxiety that is, you know, the anxiety of physical assault, of being stared at, of being stalked, has stopped being a stressor for women in their pursuit of academics or in their pursuit in their workplace. That's just not a stressor in experiencing the university, as it were. And I think in India, much more than in Iceland and Sweden, of course, women are always on the alert. That is, they're always having to make decisions about, you know, where to be, at what time, what to wear, how to be safe. I mean, in a sense, women are constantly trying to ensure that they are not raped if they land up in the wrong time, at the wrong place with the wrong person. This is, of course, you know, we know that the pandemic and locking people at home has meant a rise in domestic violence for people who are not safe at home. So that I recognize entirely, of course, that there are many women who are actually more at danger because they're stuck at home. But in going out to the university, traveling in public spaces and so on, this stressor has sort of, you know, has been reduced to a great extent. And as interactions moved online, I think one of the things that's happened is that women and other vulnerable groups have become much more comfortable with their video off, behind their screen, not having to be on public display constantly. And you know, the chat box or the social event online has meant that women have control over who can see them, what part of them can be seen, who can follow them, for instance, you know, around or even on media and so on. And I have found, therefore, you know, and I still have to wrap my head around some of this, with the kinds of complaints I'm getting, sexual harassment complaints I'm hearing, is that women have had perhaps the luxury to think much more consciously about their boundaries. Because we know that while the social media space, the digital space has empowered women to launch the Me Too movement, we know very well that this space is inundated with harassment, with stalking, quite apart from just trolling and abuse and so on. And I have found, and we all know this, that the tolerance for being stalked online is much higher than that of being physically stalked. So, for instance, you'll find especially among younger university students that somebody is suddenly liking all their photographs, commenting on all their photographs, or sending even very innocuous comments like, hello, do you want to be my friend? Why aren't you replying to me? And the tolerance for this kind of stalking is much higher than if somebody physically follows you around on campus or sits in class and stares at you and so on. But the fact is that this stalking online actually takes up the entire mental space. And it invades the privacy of the home as well, where you can lock your physical body away. And so one of the things I have found is that women have been allowed to now focus on this constant violation of the online space because their physical bodies have been invisibilized, or they have control over the display of this physical body. And in the last couple of minutes that I have left, I just wanted to talk about the other thing, and we can of course talk about this in the discussion, is that the one very important factor for those of us who work in the field of sexual harassment in the academia is that of gender sensitization. So students who are joining the university now or have been here for the last 3 years, they could not have escaped hearing about the Me Too movement. And actually many of them have been part of Me Too movements in their own circles. And this has made it much easier to start talking about sexual harassment through gender sensitization, which is all of it has gone online now. I have to say that almost every single time I do a gender sensitization session, somebody or the other will come up and say, women are just making use of the Me Too movement to maliciously, attack an innocent young man and so on. This is what women are up to. But in general, I think the awareness that things need to change and that patriarchal structures need to be challenged. I think this is an awareness, at least there's an awareness of this conversation. I find, and I don't know what Lisa will think about this, I find the harder job is actually to do gender sensitization of faculty, of older people. And even harder than that, I think, and more crucial, is to train the people who ultimately get on to sexual harassment committees, complaints committees, to do this training. So I think the Me Too movement itself has come out of very hard work done for at least half a century, I would say, if not more, by many, not just women, but also men and people from all other sexualities, and so on. And movement has opened up a space in which this work, can carry on further, and there can be further action and change. So that's what I say by way of starting a conversation, I hope.
Thank you so much. For everyone here who doesn't know this, we admitted Lisa and Vinita 10 minutes early, just to introduce them to each other, and the conversation began immediately right there. So I'm going to shut up and just let you carry on that conversation and intervene only where necessary.
Yeah, thank you, Vinita. There's so many things. I don't know where to start really, but I might start with this. Harder to gender sensitize faculty than students, and even though in the Swedish academic context, this thing, I mean, it's fascinating how, especially then male faculty after the Me Too movement were very surprised, very shocked, of course, and even though before we started the hashtag Akademiuppropet, there was a buzz in the corridors, even among male colleagues, like, do you think there's going to come something in academia? And we maybe, but a lot of surprise, of course. But it also, I think, at least I have been invited to, not very many, but, to internal working groups where a subject maybe have wanted to talk about these sexual harassments, or more, even things as that we don't have very many women in higher positions. And so I think it's opened up a kind of yeah, it took off some, I don't know, shades or something that, and it came from different, it kind of also came from male faculty that was very good, because that is one of the things I think it's hard, how to now, when we move forward, how do we make this space even more inclusive maybe, but still safe? And is that even possible? I don't know if you have any idea about that, because the digital space that we are now in many ways, it's, I guess it is safe. It is, as you say, it's safer in some aspects and not like unsafer in others. And I'm more concerned with how can we work forward with these working against sexual harassments, and making the space that we created also, I don't know, inclusive to men that want to work with these. Have you thought about that, Vinita, at all?
I think the inclusion of men into this space is crucial, I think. And one of the things that I have found working with students especially is that so many of the men who join this space are men who have been sexually harassed or abused themselves.
Yeah.
And surprisingly enough, I mean, again, of course, this should not be surprising, is that while women often respond with experiences of, abuse or harassment, men are much more reticent about it. And we know he is responsible for that as well. And I think that just the ability to think about the vulnerability of the male body as well, that's something that has allowed men to also empathize with what women go through. And certainly, of people with different sexualities, the trans, for instance, have found it much easier to relate. As I was saying earlier, I found that it's much easier in a sense to talk to students, because even completely ignorant, have never heard anything before, they're also open to listening. The problem with faculty, of course, is that, especially as teachers, we feel we know everything already. And so it's interesting for me that you are saying that many of the men were surprised at what they saw around them, because I always feel that men must talk about these things in groups of their own. About women in a certain way, about a certain colleague in a certain way, and so on. For them to be surprised that this has happened, that they are part of this culture, is what I have found even here among faculty. So what we have had is some complaints by students against, say, male faculty. So somebody, for instance, who said in an online class, to a class of physics, I think, where are the women? Why are they not speaking up? Maybe they're in the kitchen. Now, the really surprising thing to me in this is that the students complained. That to me really amazing. But when I did speak to this young faculty member, he was just very surprised. He said, I never thought that I was sexist. He said, I have never thought I had any form of sexism in me. I'm so conscious about not being sexist. I think, the fact that men need to think about these things, I think is important in itself, even if there's a resistance earlier. I just wanted to respond to what you were saying about the safety of the digital space. And I think that that's not something, as you realized yourself, I think it's very hard to keep it a safe space because I have seen, even where stories have come up, the trolling and the abuse of the person who comes out with the story is devastating. As a matter of fact, I often wonder if now that the movement has happened, if that's the best way to get any kind of justice, because we know that there really hasn't been very much justice to people, spoken in this space. I think the one reason that I think that the safety that this space provides is because, one of the things I talk about in my chapter is that while everybody believes that sexual harassment is a terrible thing, when it's an actual woman, especially a woman, I would say, but I think it's the same thing for gay men or even lesbian women, anything where the optics is different. I think it's very, I think it's very difficult for people to accept that here is someone who has been wronged. So it's always, you know, her hair is too short, her earrings are too long, her voice is too loud, she's complaining too much, she's not speaking enough. And so the digital space takes away that physical voice and that physical body and that anonymity that comes behind that. I think that is what gives safety to this digital space. But to keep it safe from, you know, becoming a space of abuse. And I just wanted to ask if when you created that Facebook page, did you have any trolling or abuse or anything like that? Or was it mostly people who were looking at improving this academic space?
Yeah, I would say that, but it, of course, it's that's also the thing of creating, when creating a private group like that, it depends on, or it's very depending on who starts it. So I started it, and then I share it with people that I know that are probably interested in joining and seeing this as, and then they, you know, they share it with their, but of course that is probably some kind of filter bubble, because it's, I don't know if we reach the most the people that in academia that mostly needed it. We had, so I would say we didn't have the problem with trolling at all, because it was very much, you invited people that you knew were academics, but after a while you couldn't know that either, and there became these suspicions inside the group about, like, oh, I think that's a journalist, or I think somebody told about this, as if it was a very big secret. And like, it became these like, yeah, conflict areas around how we should talk about it, if we could talk about it, you know, all those kind of things, but also about this issue of, so we said women in academia. I mean, the movement was bigger, and of course we didn't exclude, but we kept on saying the biggest problem is, sexual harassment of women, and of course non-binary didn't feel included, and we also had the problem with languages. We have a lot of, it took some time before we could do the communication in both Swedish and English, and still it was mostly Swedish. So all those things, of course, became excluding in a way, but what we didn't have was people sharing their story and getting negative comments, or everything was very supportive. And if you didn't want to share it in the group at all, because we actually wanted them to send emails, because to make sure that it wasn't supposed to be any kind of, I mean, you could choose, and you could do both. If you wanted a lot of heart or support in that way, or comments, you could, but I felt that having both those two possibilities made it also a way of just being able to write it down, send it away, and being a part of this bigger narrative. Then I think that was a big strength. But of course, it just took, you know, it wasn't as easy as saying Me Too and writing your story. So, but I think I'm happy we did it that way, also because in academia then it wasn't this focus on a certain professor or perpetrators. It became a bigger discussion. Some people thought it became not as, I don't know, that it became a little bit watered out, what you call it, like it wasn't, because it becomes it's very general, and you can't really pinpoint anybody and say that's the bad guy. But I think it was good in the long run. But I don't know if that answered your question really, but I think it was safe because it wasn't open, more or less, and that it could afterwards, of course, people could share their stories also by putting Me Too but I think most women were just keen on telling their story. I also did some follow-up interviews for a project so I interviewed some of the women that sent in testimonies, some that wanted, and they described it a lot like, okay, it just felt like I'm part of a bigger narrative. It's not my story that's the important thing. It's like that it becomes this movement, and I think that because that's the problem, that if people know that you are the one saying it, they can always say, oh, she's a little bit that, she's a little bit, like try to, and now the whole physical thing was actually gone, and in the end, nobody really knew who had told all those testimonies. And I think that became even more powerful, especially, and also this more inclusive towards male faculty that then could be like, okay, these are testimonies, but they weren't connected to bodies in a way. And I think that also opened a space that made it possible to talk about afterwards.
I just want to say that as we come on to our last 20 minutes, that if there are any questions or if anyone in the audience would like to make a comment, then you can put it in the chat if you like, or just raise your hand on the square and I'll see it. And if you want, you can unmute yourself and talk, or you can put the question in the chat.
I think I just wanted also to say, Vinita, I think what you write in your chapter, that the digital media offered or allowed women or gave them the space and time to be master of their narratives without the pressure of the judgment. I think that really sums up what at least Akademiuppropet and these private chat rooms or platforms groups became it slowed down the pace in a way, and you could decide, I'm gonna say it, I'm not gonna say it, I'm just gonna be supportive or whatever and I think that is a very big difference in if this would just be a manifestation, or like if it would be more a traditional social movement. This you could decide when and where a little bit, and how to interact in these groups, and I think that was a strength in starting it digitally. But I still think that it's important to say that most social movements today use digital media as one kind of tool. When this started, and as I write in my chapter a little bit on that, it was like, oh, this is only clicktivism, and it's not the same thing as real social activism. And I think this is like 3-4 years ago now, and I think this is also with the pandemic, and we are much more using this as a tool among others, and of course the desire to meet and to discuss and to that's also important. But I think these Me Too movement shows that it's the digital space was important, but it was not the only. It was not. I mean, it became very much more, and is still an ongoing process, I think, and so I think that's also changed since we did this. It was like, oh, is this real activism or not? Was something I was always, oh, is it? But now it just feels like, oh, we're using the tools that are there, and the digital tools are I think, important to just be able to like calm down and create this narrative. And I think that's very to the point.
I don't know if there are any questions or if anyone wants to say something, but I do think that the Me Too movement, the reason it was a breakthrough is because I think, you know, I'm not just talking about cisgendered women, but I think the physical form, what gender has done to us is the optics of the physical form actually govern your identity in ways. And so speaking from that physical form becomes a certain kind of a narrative. Whereas when it's on the screen and it can be read and reread without being questioned, you know how many women, the minute you question them once, they'll immediately back off and say, no, maybe I'm not so sure. This is the way women are raised. They're raised to not speak in public places. They're raised to all question themselves. We know this from when in working in sexual harassment, that women will always wait to be sexually harassed multiple times, saying, no, I'm probably wrong. This is probably not what it really is. I'm overreacting, and only then actually complain. So I think what the digital media did in taking the body out of it and the judgmental eyes that are on women, and women are as judgmental of women as men are. We know this. Perhaps that was crucial.
I have a question, or at least something that I'd like to hear just more about. I mean, you both talked about the difficulty of educating actually older people, and Lisa pointed out how, you know, in sexual harassment in academia, it's mostly the men who are in a position higher than you, and it's mostly men. And I was thinking how to connect that with the complaints mechanisms. Because I know that Vinita has been part of, you know, the what is it called?
Internal complaints.
Sexual harassment, the policy that was formulated in Delhi University, and how it tried so hard to be different from the very much more Western, I think, American model of complaints mechanisms, where the head of the institution eventually gets to take the call on what to do, and the committee is made up of, you know, people who are put together in a rather opaque manner. So I was wondering if you know, either of you or both of you wanted to just talk about that as how the complaints mechanism is made up of people who need to be sensitized, I guess, in a generalization.
Yeah, I can say that in the Swedish case, almost all university went quite fast after the Akademiuppropet came out, started whistleblower functions, and this was a new thing. We have not yet known how that is working out. It was supposed to go straight to the lawyers at the university, and as I assume then is that many of these complaints are not cannot be handled by the law. It's more a cultural thing. It's more on workplace level. It's more on I mean, if one of the testimonies would be there, of course it would be like, okay, here is something. This is a crime, but I mean, we still don't really know what happens in those whistleblower functions. And I think that's very important to analyze, because it could also just be a black box again. In many of the Akademiuppropet testimonies, they included the harassment, what they did. They tried to report it to boss, to the HR department, or and most of them did not get the help they needed, the support. They had to find support by themselves, find a psychologist or something. And I don't know, but I think this has been a little bit clarified, like how the process, what you should do, who you should talk to, and if any faculty member that gets a report on sexual harassments have to act on it. And I mean, this has been discussed more, and I'm not sure that it's as clear everywhere. And I can't really even speak for my own, I mean, what we should do, but at least it started a process on, okay, if somebody reports the same, I mean, the same process have to start for all, doesn't matter if it's a faculty, if it's a student that's been harassed, or that should be like clear cut. But I don't know really how it is in practice, as if also with the new functions, if they are evaluated, but many new functions and checklists have been created, I'm sure, in Sweden.
In India, actually, there's a law that requires every workplace to have a sexual harassment committee. It's come in as a parliamentary law in 2013, but it has been in effect as guidelines and as an ordinance since, I think, 2000. And it lays out very clear guidelines. You know, this is how you elect the committee. This is the function of the committee. This is how you report a crime. You report sexual harassment. There's also a very, very good definition of sexual harassment. As a matter of fact, I think it's pretty much one of the best definitions of sexual harassment that I've seen anywhere. It is very clear that sexual harassment does not depend on the motive of the harasser, that on the intent of the person. It is on the impact, on the way that it is received. It looks at sexual harassment as verbal, non-verbal, non-physical, showing of pornography, staring, stalking, just all of this comes under that. So the law itself is very, very good. It's an excellent law. The problem, of course, is in implementing it. And until the 2013 law came in, all the committees had to be elected. So it had to be independent of the authority, the executive authority. Place. But the 2013 law says that, for instance, in the university, in the college, it is the principal or the vice chancellor who would appoint that committee. And that made things very different. And I've seen the change in the functioning of these committees pre-2013 and post-2013. So the kinds of people that you have on committees now, I managed to get on one pretty much by accident because, you know, circumstances. There was a case that person who was in charge had gone on leave. There was a case at that time. They were scared that it would hit the newspaper headlines. So in a rush, they asked me to be on the committee. And once I came in, I made sure that I did my whole 3-year term. But it was very difficult to work with that committee. Even, you know, the case that I just talked about, to me, it was clearly sexual harassment. There are 6 girls in a class. As it is, women are made to feel that they should not be in the sciences. And then you have a professor who says this, something like this, even though it was not his intention. Was not his motivation. He turned out to be a really good person in general and all that. For me to convince the committee and to say that this is sexual harassment was very difficult. This part of the problem is that when you have a person in authority, their entire agenda is going to be to protect the image of their institution. And they're certainly not going to want cases to come up at all. So I don't know. I have a bunch of questions and comments in the chat box.
Yeah, Anvesh has said we're very much in the middle of academia that forces us to look at and analyze our texts on the basis of intersectionality. In your dealings of sexual harassment cases in academia, especially in a country like India, where there are so many issues of caste and religion, how far has the discourse included considerations of these factors as well as an important influence with regard to abuse? So I assume that this is aimed at you, Vinita, but Lisa, feel free to jump in.
You know, before I answer Anvesh's question, I just wanted to say, to everyone what I was talking to Lisa about before we started, which is that one keeps thinking that in a country in which literacy levels themselves are low, patriarchal structures are so entrenched, and we have all the intersectionalities of caste and class, you know, fundamentalist religion as well, not just religion as faith in God, which is also very, very often a cause for dealing with sexual harassment and so on. One of the things that it would be really interesting to hear Lisa talk about also is just what happened. At which point do we expect patriarchal structures to wear down and allow a space where sexual harassment is not a thing at all, or is something that we don't need to think about? But to answer Anvesh's question, I think one of the things that I see all the time, especially in the university where I teach, is that because of these intersections, intersectionalities, there is no simple way of addressing sexual harassment. Like the young professor I talked about, who just didn't think he was being sexist at all, because the fact is that in his home, his wife does the cooking. It's a fact, in spite of the fact that he, has studied in the US and all that. And so, for instance, there are so many young men who are coming from rural areas, who are coming from a state like Haryana, where I live, for instance, where the ratio of women to men is very, very low because of female infanticide and female feticide. So when these young men have no idea about what sexual harassment even is, and are really surprised. I think the important thing is not to have the same yardstick for everyone, and is to be able to understand. As a matter of fact, one of the sessions I did with a class, a very, very large class, there were about 100 students there. This is before the pandemic, and I went in, I did my whole thing. I said, here's the law, this is sexual harassment, this is what you have to do, this is what patriarchy is, this is how people are raised. And I did my whole thing. At the end of it, one young man got up and he was very upset. He said, you are telling us all these things now, and you're making it sound like it's all our fault. And he says, I'm 18 years old and I've never heard anyone saying this before. So how can you tell me that it's my fault I behave like this? Stare at a girl. And I was literally like knocked down. I looked at him and I said, you're absolutely right. It's the failure of an entire society. And I have this coming in and just acting as if everyone has come from exactly those same spaces. So Anvesh's question about the intersectionalities is crucial. Anvesh is a young student of mine who's very, very active in the Gender Forum, which has gone entirely online. He has helped set up the most wonderful Gender Forum festival that we had recently, in which we had music one day, and then we had theater the next day, and we had poetry on one day, and just talking about many issues. And he has really been pushing for us to include LGBTQI plus issues in talking about sexual harassment. And he has himself stories of sexual harassment that he has talked about. And, the amazing thing for me is having young people like him, and a lot of young people like him who are willing to bring in the change, who already have an awareness, but also people like this young man who then joined our Gender Forum and is one of our most active members now, because he says, this is how I used to think, and things have to change. I have to go back to my village and I have to tell my parents that they can't do this, So I think this is the ongoing work that we have to do. So yes, I'm absolutely right.
There's another comment on the chat. It's more a comment than a question. That says that it's actually easier to analyze. It's easy to analyze narratives, and it's much harder to actually speak out. And this is something that, of course, is entirely true. It's something that the Me Too movement has brought out in different ways. In our previous RIC session, Rochelle McPhee and Pamela Runstad actually spoke specifically about this, about how to create spaces where survivors can speak, and how to give them options other than lawyers and police and case. I'm sorry, my cat. He's clearly thinks he needs to join in the conversation. So that was a comment that went up there, and I thought I would bring it to both of you just in case you would like to add something to it.
I can add a little bit on this also what Vinita said about this, the hardship of being in this, or being the one who decides what is sexual harassment or not, if it's a committee or if it's, I mean, that has been the discussion too, like, oh, is this, or should we include sexism in, or because we also in Sweden we have the law, and it's very strict, and it has to be certain things, and if it's not sexual harassment, and then it's not, you cannot be punished for it. So I have thought about, like, it was good with the focus on sexual harassment during the Me Too, because it's kind of a narrow definition, at least most of it. But I mean, I like your definition much more, Venita. The problem is, how can we, that's very good to use in, you know, workplaces, when a collective takes, I think, responsibility for that. Everywhere there is some kind of sexism, and women are treated differently, and men, all these kind of sensitizing discussions. I think that's when we need a very inclusive definition. And I've thought more and more that we should kind of change the focus on what is sexual harassment, and is this sexual harassment or not, to talk about if it's a workplace, like an organizational culture, what is it that makes it possible, makes these things possible? Is it that colleagues don't say anything? Is it that it's too, I don't know, there's too much these semi-professional spaces that is used? I mean, to kind of like use it more to focus on a certain context where this is made possible in a way. That's so in one way, I think this, like, having an objective way to approach this, I think is problematic, because it's always going to be like, no, that's not it. No, that's not it either. And in this intersectional discussion, in the Swedish case, in academia, we had a lot of discussions in the group on this. Also because we didn't get that many stories from non-Swedish women in academia. But when we did, they themselves thought that it had also to do with that they were not non-Swede, that, you know, you're even lower in some kind of hierarchy, and also this thing of having more precarious contracts. I think that is some kind of intersection that is more or less in all testimonies. Most, you know, doctorals, short-term contract, you know, people that are not a threat are also easier targets to harass, and they are in a position that they need connections, and they need to socialize and be, so they can't say no to certain things that they might. So I think that intersection was there. And then, of course, it's also this network effect of the group that I think it was, even though I think my network is kind of broad in a way, so I don't know if it was the testimonies or if it was the group that we didn't get enough of those stories, but the ones that they connect their experience to either skin color or non-Swedishness in a way.
We're actually 1 minute away from the end. There's so many questions that I would have liked to circle back to and have both of you say something about, but I think that would be asking for trouble at this point.
Yes.
But these are meant to be ongoing conversations to keep the momentum going from the movement, because we know that movements often just spend themselves out and dissipate, and we really want to keep, you know, the conversation going and keep the debate alive. So I hope that, you know, this will go online and people will listen to it, and I hope that both of you will stay in touch.
Yes,
and
definitely.
I will leave it to Elin to thank everyone.
So thank you to both our speakers, and thank you to everyone in the audience. The last session in the series is in Icelandic on the 20th of May, for those of you who are able to enjoy that one. And thanks again. This has been truly Very interesting, very necessary.
If both of you would like to stay on for a few minutes.